Jillian Balow, welcome to the Star-Tribune.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So, this is your chance. Tell us about yourself and why you're running.
Great. Well, I'm Jillian Balow. I'm the Republican nominee for State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and I'm really running as a mother, as an educator, and as a leader in our state. Over the past 4 years, I've seen controversial politics overtake and distract from what's really important in education. And while 4 years ago I had no idea I would be doing this, I felt very compelled to throw my hat in the ring, so to speak, and step up because I possess a unique skill set. I'm a Wyoming native, a Wyoming graduate. I spent 10 years in Wyoming classrooms teaching in both small and large school districts. I spent time as a private consultant on education issues in multiple states, and I was a leader in the Wyoming Department of Education, where I worked on school improvement and literacy efforts across the state. I've spent the last 8 years in state government. I have a master's degree in education and decided to move into state government leadership, where again I worked with school districts at the Department of Education. I left there in 2011 and went to the governor's office, where I actually took quite a steering away from education and worked on economic development. Again, I had an opportunity to work with communities across the state to build their infrastructure and meet their economic development goals as communities. And I've worked on sliding water towers in Sundance, to building infrastructure in Carbon County in case of coal gasification growth, and worked on road issues and contractor preference, and kind of all over the board with local governments and economic development. I was the liaison to SLIB for the governor, and so definitely understand that process and understand what an important role the top 5 elected officials play in the economic development, both at the local and the state level. I've been over at the Department of Family Services for the last 2.5 years, where I am the administrator of the Family Assistance Division. I oversee all of the economic assistance programs for the state. I have 200 staff statewide. I oversee over $100 million budget a year, and have been responsible in 2.5 years for turning around budgets, for putting contracts out for competitive bid, for improving workflow and processes across our state, which translate to taxpayers saving money and improved services. And again, that's the skill set that we need in the state superintendent's office. Someone who understands how to reduce bureaucracy, someone who understands how to lead people and organizations and manage organizations, and someone who has a deep and broad understanding of our state and of education.
Tell us, what's the first policy decision you'd make upon taking office as superintendent of public instruction?
2 things need to happen simultaneously. We really need to build the capacity of the Department of Education so that it functions as it's supposed to, and we need to move education forward. There are a number of decisions and conversations that have been shelved over the last 4 years, and for me, one of the most important is assessment. We have added assessments in the last 4 years. We've changed PAWS. The entire test PAWS has been changed. The name remained the same. That's about it. We added SAWS. We made MAP mandatory. We've added a suite of tests that lead up to the ACT, and all of the school districts have also added their own tests. Nothing has come off the table. For me, I know that as a parent, as an educator, and as a leader, that's not the right way to go about it. We have a lot of information about students, but not a lot of meaningful information. When we talk about assessments, we really need to accomplish 2 things. Number 1, we need to measure student performance. We need to make sure that from day to day, week to week, year to year, our students are on track to succeed in school and life. The other thing that we really need to do with an assessment system is assure that that we can assess the health of the system, the health of our organization, which every functional organization assesses and measures, and education is no different. So that's one discussion that we really need to have, and leadership has been missing from that discussion. Our legislature's been talking about it, consultants have been talking about it, school districts, parents, all entities and stakeholders in education have been talking about that, but the leadership is missing again to really coordinate that and bring it together. That's part of a bigger education vision that we need to work on immediately. We need an education vision that is shared across entities, that is shared across stakeholder groups, and it needs to be a 10-year vision that transcends political elections. This isn't my vision, this isn't my agenda. This is polling educators, this is polling parents, business folks, and citizens from around the state together and saying, what do we want for our kids? What are our clear targets? And how are we going to take collective responsibility? An assessment seems like a really great place to start, and in thinking about that 10-year vision for our education system in Wyoming.
Talk about, as a parent, how you would characterize your children's experience in public schools.
As a parent, as a parent, I have to say that we have had a wonderful opportunity to have our children in two settings. They've been in both public school and in Christian school. We made the choice to put them in Christian school. That was a faith-based decision. I'm so grateful to have that opportunity, but it was not based on the quality of the school systems or the quality of education that we know our kids get in Wyoming. So, in terms of the public school education that my children have received, it's been second to none. Our schools, our teachers are excellent. Our school facilities are world class, and there's been a concerted effort at every corner to assure that my children have had success and been successful at what they try. And I will say it has not been without challenge. It's not been rosy. We have had to access special services for one of my children, and navigating through that, even as an educator, is very complex and very difficult. So beyond the school system lies the community, and oftentimes those community resources are vitally important in the education of our children as well. And in Wyoming, we're so lucky to have smaller communities where school districts typically have those great relationships and those great partnerships with community resources, so that we can look at the education of our children more holistically, which is a value add for every Wyomingite. As I talk with folks from other states or folks who have moved into Wyoming, oftentimes there's, from other states, envy at what we are able to offer our students. And oftentimes for families that have moved in from other states, they look at our education system as a reason to move to our states, among others. And I think we need to take that to heart. There are so many wonderful things going on in education, and we really need to build on our strengths, recognize our strengths, celebrate our strengths, and address our challenges together. And as state superintendent, I know that we can continue to do that because school districts are doing that every day with every student.
Let's talk about federal overreach. You've repeatedly talked about the problem of federal overreach, and where specifically are you seeing that? And if you reject federal involvement in those areas, how would you gauge the impact on funding?
Great question, Jeremy. So, federal overreach is a reality in Wyoming and perhaps across the nation, whether we're talking about wildlife management, management of our natural resources through permitting and other restrictions that the federal government puts on us, management even of our air and borders within our state. And I think it's a bit naive to think that education is exempt from that. Education has become a national political issue because it's been embraced as such, and therefore it is paramount that we're vigilant about assuring that federal advice that we receive is not conflicting with our state goals or with the direction that we're going locally. We need to make sure and uphold local control and state control over education. So specifically, let's talk about standards and assessment. We have state standards, the Wyoming Content and Performance Standards, which represent more rigor than we've ever had. Standards in and of themselves are exactly what we should be doing in terms of the state setting out a framework. Can we do better? Yes. I haven't talked to anyone who disagrees with the fact that we need standards. It's the process by which we came to our current standards that's lackluster. But let's put that aside and let's talk about the finish line, which is the assessment. And when we adopt a national assessment that's shared across states, all of a sudden we lose some control in the middle. And that's local school districts selecting curriculum and selecting teaching materials that align to the needs at the local level. They lose the flexibility and perhaps some ability to make those important decisions at the local level. So one thing that I've advocated for from the beginning is not adopting the national assessment. In our state, we've looked at the SBAC, or the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and I think that that's just the beginning. That's one example. That's what you asked for, but there are many other examples of federal overreach attempts in education that, again, aren't way out there, but little by little they take away our ability to maintain our autonomy as a state over education issues. As an administrator at Family Services, I deal with this every day, and there's not a conspiracy theory or great effort to overtake what we do all at once, take over the world, but it's little by little by little, and it just takes vigilance. I've turned away federal funds when they don't align with our state goals, and I'll give you an example. One is in early education, and when we look at the carrot, which is money, and pretty easy money, but we look at the stick, and that is that we have to adjust our goals as a state and focus on meeting federal guidelines and not making improvements to our services, then we're moving too far off course as a result of getting federal money. So what we need to do is strike a balance between federal money, federal strings, and maintaining what we know we need and deserve from the federal government in terms of funding, in terms of guidance, and in terms of a framework. And there is a fine balance, but it is very complex, and it's critical to have a state superintendent who understands those complexity, who knows how to reach out, and who knows how to be vigilant and say yes to this, no to that, maybe to that, negotiate when necessary, and move forward without federal advice when necessary.
And money.
And money.
Assess the quality of special education services within Wyoming. What would you do to improve them?
Special education funding is 100% federal, and that is important federal money. The federal government sets out a framework for assuring that states meet the compliance for those monies, and if those monies weren't flowing from the federal government, we would have to set up a similar framework statewide to have those checks and balances on special education. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. We've seen in the last 4 years some mismanagement of special education funding being diverted to general education, and again, at the state level, we need to be vigilant and make sure that doesn't happen. Every student with special needs needs to have access to the services and the staff necessary to assure that they have an equitable and fair shot at making improvements in education.
Let's talk about homeschooling. What's your perception of homeschooling with parents who choose to practice it? Should it be encouraged or discouraged?
Homeschooling is one more option that parents must have. As I mentioned before, my children went to Christian school. That was a deeply personal and faith-based decision. For me, that had nothing to do with quality. For others, folks need to have options. Folks may make choices to, parents may make choices to have their children educated in alternate settings for a variety of reasons. And as a state, we need to make sure that those options are available. Public education, traditional education works for most, but we see even within public education, we've created opportunities for diverse learners to succeed through special education, through career tech ed paths, through alternative high schools, etc. Homeschool, hybrid educations through virtual learning, Christian schooling, parochial schooling, charter schools, private schools of other means, classical academies, etc. Those are all options that need to be laid on the table for Wyoming parents to take advantage of. And at the state level, I think my responsibility is to advocate for high quality options and increased access to options. And again, bolstering public education because it is what works for most kids, and bolstering and making it the very best that it can be, and encouraging that diversification within public schooling.
So assess the state of career and technical education in Wyoming and its importance.
Jeremy, that's a great question, and one thing that's been a focus of mine from the beginning of the campaign and even before. As I mentioned, I'm a parent of 2 children, and I don't know what their future holds. They're 14 and 8, and I would like to think that college is not the only option for them, that they can prosper in Wyoming or elsewhere without a college education. Certainly if college is in their future, that's great, but we need to be prepared and we need to evolve with the times to know during K-12 education that going to college isn't the end-all be-all for all students. We can do that in a number of ways, through career tech ed opportunities, through partnerships with higher education, including our community colleges and the University of Wyoming, and that's happening right now. Again, what's missing is that spotlight from the Wyoming Department of Education, that advocacy from the state superintendent to really look at career tech ed as a viable option within our state, so that our workforce is improved, so that our industry doesn't feel they have to go out of state to import the workforce as they feel that they do sometimes now, and we can really create programs within our K-12 education to assure that our kids can prosper in Wyoming or elsewhere without a college education. One thing that I would like to do as a state superintendent is have this be a focus during the recalibration process. What has happened is, through No Child Left Behind, our school districts have been forced to focus and allocate resources on assuring that students are proficient in English language arts and math by the end of 2014. In an effort to meet those federal mandates, lots of local school districts have had to make tough choices, and unfortunately, career tech ed, the reduction or elimination of career tech ed programs has been one of those consequences. The further that we move away from No Child Left Behind, and the more that we can focus on career technical education, the more we can see opportunities to really strengthen our career tech ed programs across our state. As I mentioned, we have a number of partnerships outside of K-12 education that are focused on this now. I mentioned higher education. BOCES is another one that's focused on training outside of sort of the traditional proficiency in language and math, language arts and math. We have a campus opening in Riverton, the first Job Corps campus in Wyoming, and the focus will be the energy industry. And I think that as soon as we all begin working in sync, we will first of all see more success in our graduation rates. We'll see a more robust workforce in our state, and we'll have an opportunity to see many more students be successful in school and life when we focus more on career and technical education and preparing our students for a future, not just in college, but in trade school and in the workforce.
You are on the record as saying Wyoming shouldn't adopt the next generation science standards, and why not, and what would you propose as a replacement?
I am on the record and I stand by that, and here's why. The next generation science standards are a set of off the shelf standards. In Wyoming, we were set to adopt those without any changes in content or format. We live on top of a science classroom in Wyoming, and since the beginning of the campaign, I have reached out to the energy industry, our partners in natural resources and geology, etc., and talked about this. I've talked about, what do our students know? What do our high school graduates know about science, about Wyoming's unique science when they graduate from high school? And what I've heard, again, is that oftentimes our students aren't prepared to articulate or to articulate the natural resources, the unique science topics that we have right here in our state. And so what I would like to see, and the reason that I'm opposed to the next generation science standards, is because we need to have that broader conversation. We need to include more stakeholders, more community members to weigh in on what do we need to have in the science standards to make sure that our students are competitive nationally and internationally in science. We don't want to leave anything behind. But what do we need to incorporate that's important to Wyoming's science into those science standards? What about coal and natural resources do our students need to know and be able to articulate? What about our unique geology do our students need to know and be able to articulate? I'm a Campbell County grad, and I didn't visit a coal mine until after I was out of high school. And to me, I think that visiting a coal mine and learning about our natural resources ought to be akin to visiting our state capitol and learning about our history. This is a very important topic, and off-the-shelf standards are not Wyoming standards. So it's really striking that balance between having high science standards that make sure our students are globally competitive and also incorporating Wyoming science into those standards. And what is important to us is our science. Another thing is that I don't believe that there's a sense of urgency regarding the science standards, and here's why. We have science standards that are almost laughable at the national level in Wyoming right now, and I realize that. Local school districts have done a great job of taking advantage of the flexibility that they have to make those better. But there is no assessment aligned to the next generation science standards or any other set of science standards right now. So if we implement the next generation science standards, we really don't have a means by which to say that they've made it to the finish line. And so, again, we need to make sure that we take our time, get stakeholder input, incorporate what's important in Wyoming science into the science standards, and assure that we have a means to measure that at the finish line.
So if you did talk to all those stakeholders and you got a consensus position that climate change was not something that they considered important to talk about, would that be that there would be no discussion of climate change? And how does that actually equip students to deal with jobs potentially outside Wyoming and the rest of the world?
You know, climate change has become, science standards has become a vehicle for talking about climate change, talking about evolution versus creationism and a number of other issues. We really need to separate those kind of, I call them 0 to 60 conversations that are so polarizing, and people feel very strongly one way or the other about those conversations. And we really need to find a comfortable speed for those issues and make sure that the science standards represent fact and represent an opportunity for school districts to teach fact and to teach both sides of issues such as climate change, which frankly aren't fully resolved right now. There is research on both sides of the issue, and students need to be exposed to that research on both sides of the issue and every issue, and make sure that they're given the opportunity to have all of the information, not just one side, and not limited information about a topic. Then and only then will our students be prepared to compete globally if they so choose.
At debate last night, you objected to your opponent's charge of waffling on Common Core standards, and you seem to say you objected more to the approval process for the standards than the standards themselves. Is that an accurate characterization?
Can you repeat the question? I'm asking. Are you asking if the accurate characterization is that I was mischaracterized?
No. Okay.
Or is it okay?
So let me rephrase it.
Okay.
So my understanding was from you last night was that it wasn't as much that you had an issue with Common Core standards as it was that you felt like the way that those became instituted or accepted across the state was not widespread enough with how it built. I'm not wording it very well now either. You felt like the process of adoption was poor. Not that you had a problem with the standards as much as the process.
Yeah, so let me, I think that this whole convolution, even between you and I, underscores the complexity of this issue. From the beginning, I have been very clear about my stance on Common Core. As a teacher, I am for high standards. The Fordham Foundation and many other sources rate the standards that we have right now, which are the Common Core standards, as being higher than what we had before. This is a good place to start, but not a good place to finish. Again, they're off-the-shelf standards. We haven't made any changes in content or format to these, and this is a starting point, not an ending point. What I object to is the process by which we came to the standards that we currently have. What I propose is that we turn that paradigm upside down. Instead of saying, if you want to weigh in on the standards, come to Casper these 4 weekends, or come to Cheyenne, or join this phone call and or comment publicly on our website and give us your thoughts about what you need to see in the standards. That's how it has historically been. Very important decisions about Wyoming education have been made by a relatively small group of people. What I intend to do is turn that paradigm upside down. WDE staff and myself will go to communities across the state, and we will ask communities to weigh in. We'll talk to we'll engage school board members, educators, business people, parents, and others from across each community and ask them to come to the table and really give some input on where they think and what they think Wyoming standards need to look like. Those conversations, the input, will be the centerpiece for the adoption process that will take place immediately upon my taking office. We will open up that adoption process. I'll work with the State Board of Education. We'll go to the community level to garner that input, and we will move forward so that in 2017, when we're statutorily required to put standards in front of the State Board of Education for adoption, we have standards that are truly representative and reflective of Wyoming voices. So yes, it's the process, and there are also some concerns that I have with the current standards. That said, that's the case with anything in education. This is all about continuous improvement. What we have now is a starting point. It is not an end point. The process needs to be improved. The standards need to be improved. I disagree that we should repeal them. Repeal means to annul or revoke. Repealing would be a top-down mandate from our legislature where during the legislative session they would do as 5 or 6 other states have done in the nation and say no more Common Core, and either not give us another option for standards at the state level, or they would say go back to what you had before. That is not the way to go about it. In fact, that perhaps is part of the reason that we're in this disagreement and this debate that we're in now. It needs to be ground up. It needs to be bottom up. We have taken ownership over the standards before we've built agreement, and that needs to change. We have to build agreement around our standards before we move forward with ownership.
Let's talk about school funding. What's the key to avoiding litigation on requested cost of living increases for school districts? Is it even avoidable?
Litigation is absolutely avoidable, and it's avoidable through conversation. Litigation right now that is in the wings and being talked about will go before our legislature for debate, and I think that is the perfect place to begin having those conversations. school districts and communities are given a great deal of flexibility in how they allocate their funds for education. It is the legislature's responsibility to assure that school districts and students are adequately funded for education. There is room to meet in the middle. We need to have that rigorous debate with the legislature, the school districts, and other stakeholders in education to avoid litigation. But we do need to have that debate. That leads to better outcomes, and I believe that that will avoid litigation in this case.
Questions from you? No, I'm good. Great. Well, let me give you a couple minutes to make a closing statement.
All right. Goodness. Thank you again for taking time to hear from the candidates and for taking the time to post this important information for Wyoming voters as they go to the polls. There are clear and distinct differences between my opponent and myself. I'm the Republican nominee, and there are differences in the party's vision for education, both in our country and at the local level. And I think it's important to draw that bright line of distinction between those philosophical differences in tying us closer to having federal advice or tying us closer to really creating more autonomy in our state or maintaining the current autonomy that we have over state and local control in education. I firmly believe that the most important decisions about education need to be made by families and local school districts. Our families and our teachers are the ones who are with our students every single day. The state's responsibility is to really set that framework to support school districts as they implement teaching and learning on a daily basis, to help school districts navigate through the complexities of federal requirements, of funding, of state requirements, of statute, of complex programming, and also for the state superintendent to be a chief advocate of our education system. And that's what we need to get the Wyoming Department of Education and the state superintendent's office back to. I shouldn't even say back to, but in many ways education has been overtaken by controversial politics, and state governance and the state superintendent's office, while important, are not nearly as important as what's happening on the ground every day in every school across our state. So as state superintendent, again, I have that classroom to the boardroom to Capitol Avenue experience with education, and I truly understand what that looks like and what that needs to look like. There are 48 unique school districts in our state, and each of them deserves an opportunity to meet the unique needs within their communities. And as state superintendent, I'll really work to create that framework and that leadership and to assure that that's happening. This is all about collaboration. This is all about assuring that my agenda is not the agenda that is being pushed, but that it's our vision for education. I am very honored and excited to have the support that I have across the state, and I know that there need to be many more voices around the table when making important decisions in education than there have been in the past, and I'm excited to put that to practice. So again, I thank you for inviting me here today, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Ms. Balow, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.